episode number 6 of the Scouse Scientist. Now this video is actually the second part of my series on cystic fibrosis. So if you haven't seen the previous video, then please do go back and take a look, because that will give you a good background into cystic fibrosis, living with the condition and the genetics behind it. So this part of the video is actually an interview with Professor Kevin Southern, who is a consultant paediatrician over at Alder Children's Hospital. So take a look at the interview. So that's the newborn screening programme, isn't it?
Yeah, the newborn screening, and that's achieved by taking a small sample from a little prick of the heel of the baby.
Yeah.
And then these samples are collected on just on a card, and from those very small, what we call dried blood spots, we can analyse for a number of conditions, and cystic fibrosis is one of those. So we aim to keep them in good shape through good nutrition, exercise, and keeping their airways clear of infection. And that all sounds very simple and straightforward, but actually it's really hard work. It's a lot of hard work for the young people and for their families as well, and for their parents. And it's and that relates to the genetic condition that you've described before. So now, on a day-to-day basis, if they keep well and if they exercise and if they're well nourished, then they're fine. But if they're exposed to a virus, say a flu or a cold virus, or if a bug comes in, they have more difficulty in clearing that bug than somebody who doesn't have cystic fibrosis. First of all, we try and prevent the infection, and they do that through exercise, but also through airway clearance. So you might have heard about physiotherapy. They do that twice a day, and that's just to clear their airways. And we monitor them in clinic really closely. So if they come along to the clinic, we'll do a respiratory culture, which we call a cough swab. So basically you have a swab, which is a cotton wool bud, you cough onto it, and then we take that swab to the laboratory and we see whether it's growing any bugs. And if it is growing any bugs, even if they're well, we'll treat them quite actively with antibiotics.
The kids come into clinic like routinely
every couple of months,
when they're fit and well, and that's just for a general
it's hard
kind
work for them,
of check-up. Yeah, because I came along to one of the CF clinics last year, and I was so surprised and by all of the different people involved in the care and the different things that they have to get checked, you know, every few months. Like you said, it's a lot of work that goes into it.
Well, we talked about the nutrition, and one of the people that sees them is a dietitian, because one of the problems they have, aside from their airways, is their pancreas, which is a little organ that is in the abdomen, sits under the stomach, and the pancreas has got a number of different functions, but one of its functions is to secrete enzymes into the intestines to help to digest food that you've eaten. So you eat food, goes into your stomach, it gets mushed up a bit, and the acid helps to break up the big chunky bits, and then from the stomach it goes into your intestine, and into the intestines the pancreas secretes enzymes which helps to break up the large molecules like large proteins and sugars and fats, breaks them into smaller molecules that can then be digested and processed by the liver and then go into the body where you use them. So that process is quite important. And if people with cystic fibrosis, because of the abnormal salt transport, has an impact on the pancreas, and the pancreas can't secrete those enzymes as well as it should do. So what we do is we give our babies and infants and children, we give them enzymes that are manufactured and processed, and then come in capsules or small granules for the babies. And they take, every time they have a meal, they'll take the granules or they take the capsule, and that goes into the stomach, slightly digested in the stomach, but when it gets into the intestines, those artificial enzymes are able to help to digest the food. So that's that we call that pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy, or Pert, and that is taking the place of the pancreas that's not working properly.
Why is it that they need to have so many calories?
Because even if they're taking the pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy, they can never completely correct the amount of malabsorption that they have of fat, so they will never be digesting as much as they need. Also, people with cystic fibrosis, particularly younger adults, tend to have high metabolic rates.
Yeah.
So they need a bit more energy than people without cystic fibrosis. But over the past 10 years, there have been some very interesting and quite exciting developments in treatments for people with cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
These are what we call variant-specific therapies. So you know you have variants, or you may have called them mutations, of genes, and of the cystic fibrosis gene, there are many variants that have been recognised, actually nearly 2,000, although delta F508 is obviously the most common one.
So I think earlier on in the video I was talking about the most common mutation being the Phe508del mutation, but there are, like you said,
so Phe508del, we call that delta F508, or we call it F508del. There's a number of different ways of calling it, but it is a very common mutation in our clinic. That over 85% of our clinic will have either 2 delta F508 mutations or one, and they'll have another mutation. So if you can have a therapy for delta F508, that would be really quite significant, and really a large number of our patients would be amenable to that therapy. With the first variant-specific therapy that came along was a molecule called ivacaftor. And ivacaftor has been available now for 6 years as a licensed medicine for patients who have got a variant called G551D. Now G551D, you may have spoken about, is an interesting variant in that the CFTR protein, the salt transporting protein that's formed, is a full protein. It goes through the cell, gets to the cell membrane where it needs to be to do its job of salt transport, but it doesn't function. So the ivacaftor comes in, this molecule comes in, and it opens up the channel and it enables it to function as a salt transporter. Now, ivacaftor is just a tablet. It's a tablet that these patients take in the morning and then at night time. And with that medicine, the salt transport is restored, the CF defect is corrected, and their change in their condition is exceptional. Now, what we wanted to do then was find a mutation-specific therapy or a variant-specific therapy that targeted F508del, or delta F508. And that's been a struggle. And initially, because what F508del, and you may have spoken about this, but it's very interesting variant in that you have a full length of protein is formed, but the protein can't get to the cell membrane because it gets recognised as on that journey to the cell membrane through the cell. The cell goes, that's an abnormal protein, and gobbles it up and gets rid of it. So we call that a trafficking defect, a defect of the movement to the cell membrane. Now, what scientists have been able to develop have been molecules that mask that defect and enable the delta F508 protein to get to the cell membrane. But on its own, that masking molecule doesn't significantly correct the abnormal function of that protein once it gets to the cell membrane. So then they added in ivacaftor as well. And the combination of the masking protein, which is called lumacaftor, and the ivacaftor did open up the channel and did enable it to function as a salt channel, but not to any really massive degree. So it was partial correction of the defect. And that combination has been known as Orkambi, and you may have heard about that because there's been a lot of media, social media around Orkambi, and there's been a lot of campaigning to get Orkambi to the patients, which I completely understand. And you know, we'll take anything that makes a small difference.
So as I was saying, over Christmas I watched this film called 5 Feet Apart, which I don't know whether you've seen, but
5 yards.
It's
is it 5 yards?
No, I think it was 5 feet. It was 5 feet apart, but it was about 2 young teenagers who had cystic fibrosis, and they fell in love, but they couldn't go near each other because they had to always stay 5 feet apart, because you know, cross-contamination and things like that. So I just wondered whether, is that true, and why is that? Why do 2 different people with cystic fibrosis, why can't they come in contact?
Well, I haven't seen the film.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot about it though, and I've spoken to a lot of my families and young people with cystic fibrosis about the film, and it's been quite, it's had quite an impact on people with cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
I gather it's a very well made film, but it's based on good facts, and I think it's been well researched. There's some aspects of it that I mean, maybe were dramatised, but it's based and this is something that really is very much part of our lives in clinic, and you saw that when you came to the clinic, that we keep the young people with cystic fibrosis apart from each other, so as to reduce that issue of cross-infection. And the issue of cross-infection is quite interesting because people with cystic fibrosis have the potential to get the airway infection. They have that propensity, and sometimes the infection of the airways is with bacteria that are a bit unusual, that don't normally cause airway infection. So for people without cystic fibrosis, these bacteria wouldn't really be a significant problem with regard to getting chest infections. But they are, for people with cystic fibrosis, they are a significant problems. And those are bacteria like things like Pseudomonas and Mycobacterium. These are all sorts of bacteria that can have an impact on somebody with cystic fibrosis, but not somebody without cystic fibrosis. And generally speaking, those bugs get into the airways, and they're quite like the airways of people with cystic fibrosis, so they feel comfortable there and they stay there, and they cause it like a chronic infection. But there's good evidence from a large number of trials now that people with cystic fibrosis can sometimes, not often, but sometimes pass those bugs from person to person. So one person with cystic fibrosis could, by coughing or by simply talking and the bug being in the aerosol, be able to pass the bug over to somebody else with cystic fibrosis. That can happen without hand washing and that kind of thing as well. So those kind of measures are quite important, and we kind of take the route of least risk really when we're in the clinic situation. So we'll clean everything down, we keep the patients completely separated as much as is possible.
So obviously this may be a stupid question, but some families will have members of the same family, siblings that have got cystic fibrosis, so that doesn't apply to them. They can still, obviously they're going
to... Well, the potential risk is there, but you can't stop brothers and sisters sort of being around each other. I mean, one of the issues that we face on a regular basis is schools, because junior schools are quite small, but then when you go to a senior school, there might be 300 people in your year, or even more sometimes, and the chances of you having another young person with cystic fibrosis in your school year could be significantly increased. We try and identify those situations, and we work with the schools, and the schools are on the whole really super in sort of trying to keep the children in separate classes, separate activities and so forth.
I think that was all the questions, but thank you so much for letting me interview you. It's been really fascinating. I think everyone will really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming along.
So once again, I just want to say a huge thank you to Professor Kevin Southern for sharing so much information with us. I definitely learned something from that, so I hope that you did too. And of course, thank you to all you guys for watching. If you've liked the video, then please do subscribe, and don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. As a lot of you know, I've been visiting local schools doing talks about genetics and careers in science. So if you'd like the Scouse scientists to come to your school, then please get in touch. See you next time.